Welcome to the show at 6, BC and the Common Good. My name is Jim Keenan, and I am a Jesuit priest here at Boston College. And together with Brian Fleming, Thomas Childs, Brian Garreau, Bert Howell, and Billy Sue, we are the producers of this series. On Tuesday, we began the show with the following statement that we believe we should reiterate this evening. In last week's segments, both of which were on COVID-19, we heard repeatedly about the disparities in healthcare, employment, and education that lead African Americans to be much more at risk to the pandemic. At the same time, the brutal killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd highlight all the more how white privilege, anti-Blackness, white supremacy, and other forms of racism endanger the lives of our brothers and sisters. We are at Boston College, a Jesuit Catholic school committed to being men and women for others. Therefore, in light of these events, we are asking our host for the rest of this series that whether they are interviewing about prisons, food insecurity, athletics, or like this evening, Jesuit accompaniment in vulnerable times, that as they pose their questions about the issues at hand and the common good, that they specifically ask about racism in its many forms. We know that through solidarity and a commitment to the common good, we can beat the virus of COVID-19, but we must be no less committed to defeating the virus of racism that touches the lives of all of us and destroys the lives of so many. Hopefully, by this show, we will come closer to ending both of these threats. Now, let me say a word about the show at 6, which features friends and members of the BC community discussing a range of issues affecting our world today, all revolving around the theme of the common good. Topics include how the BC community is responding to the effects of COVID-19, to the enduring challenges of the marginalized, to our own resiliency and solidarity, and to the upbuilding of human dignity throughout the world. The show is based on the central insight of the common good. That is, that the resources that humanity has and needs must be shared equitably. For instance, today, each of us is called to promote the common good by social distancing, by wearing masks, by washing our hands. These practices, like other forms of solidarity, are not only for our own good, but for the common good. Now, let me just say a word about our programming. At 6:40, my co-host and I will ask our guest questions from the audience. Members of the audience can pose a question before 6:40 via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Let me repeat that. Members of the audience can pose a question before 6:40 via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. They should identify themselves by their name and their relationship to Boston College. Now let me introduce my co-host and friend. Ramesh Richards is a Jesuit deacon from the Australian province of the Society of Jesus. Ramesh was born in Malaysia and moved to Australia to pursue architectural studies. After practicing architecture in Melbourne, he joined the Jesuits and has since then earned degrees in philosophy and theology, both in Australia and at Boston College. He completed his Master of Divinity and Master of Theology, both in 2019 at Boston College. This year, he was appointed rector of the Cardinaire Project in Sydney, Australia. The mission of the project is to deepen the human, spiritual, and intellectual formation of young adults, grounding them in a love of the poor in the service of the church. To this end, he works with a team of young adult volunteers in running a social enterprise restaurant, international service programs in 8 countries, a university student accommodation, and leadership programs at many schools throughout Australia. In December, he will be ordained a priest. Ramesh, welcome.
Thank you. Allow me to introduce two of our guests today. Today we've got Father Jack Butler and Father Jim Martin. Jack Butler is the Hub Vice President for University Mission and Ministry. As such, Father Butler heads the division that develops and coordinates the university-wide process of maintaining and promoting the distinctive academic and societal mission of Boston College as a Jesuit Catholic institution. Its departments and programs include campus ministry, the Office of First Year Experience, Intersections, the Center for Student Formation, the University Mission and Ministry Service Center, the Center for Ignatian Spirituality, the Montserrat Coalition, the Volunteer and Service Learning Center, and the Ministry to Priests. Father Butler entered the Society of Jesus in 1991. He earned a BA from St. Thomas University and a Master's from Providence College, and Master's from Master of Science from Loyola College, and an STL from the Western Jesuit School of Theology, and then a PhD from Loyola College. He is trained in counseling and has worked in prison ministry, hospital treatment centers, the education apostolate, and formation within the Society of Jesus. He joined BC in 2002. Next, we have Father James Martin. Father James is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large of America, consultor to Vatican's Dicastery for Communication, and author of many books, including the New York Times bestsellers, Jesus, A Pilgrimage, and Jesus Guide, the Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. His most recent book is Building a Bridge on LGBT Catholics. Welcome to our guests. Allow me to ask the first question. We all want to do good because we know we will flourish and the world will be better. However, what I might consider good might not be so for the other, to the extent that you might consider it as violence. Father Jim, for your work in building bridges between the LGBTQI community and the church, you have received praises and also death threats. As a Jesuit and a Catholic priest, how do you accompany the LGBTQI community whilst also accompanying the very people who say that what you're doing is not good?
Well, part of it is understanding, where you think the good lies. And I think that the good lies in accompanying people and listening to their stories. I had a very good professor of moral theology during my theology studies. And his name was Father Jim Keenan, who joins us today. And he said, now, Jim, I always get confused if it's mercy or compassion, entering into the chaos of another person's life. Is that mercy?
Yeah.
So mercy is entering into the chaos of another person's life, which I've used a million times. And to enter into the chaos or the complexity and the beauty of the lives of LGBTQ people is, I think, where we're called to be in the church. And if that brings a certain degree of opposition, that's fine. It's a very small group of people that are attacking me, and the death threats and all those kinds of things. I mean, I always like to point out to people, I have the support of my Jesuit superiors, my Jesuit brothers, the Pope, who invited me to a private audience. And so I feel pretty confident in what I'm doing. But I just think, Jim's definition is a really important definition for accompaniment. And this is what Jesus asks us to do, especially for people on the margins. And there's no one more on the margins than the LGBT person in the church, because you might suggest women, that can be suggested. But I always remind people, you have Women Days in the Vatican, you have the Pope talking about giving women more incisive roles in leadership, and there's not an LGBT day in the Vatican. You don't hear the Pope talking at least explicitly about those kinds of things for gays and lesbians. So to be honest, the opposition doesn't bother me any longer. And I feel like the Jesuit goal of indifference, another way of talking about freedom, is another way to look at that. The freedom from the need to be loved, liked, or approved of. So that's how I look at that.
Father Jim, I remember you reminding me that we pray for the third degree of humility. And I guess this is the third degree of humility.
Yeah, so for people that don't know, the third degree of humility in the spiritual exercises is the desire to actually stand with Christ, who is being persecuted. Now, I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know if I sort of desire it, but it does come. And, you know, it came for Jesus, right? You know, today's gospel, the crowds praise him for his clever remarks in the face of the scribes. But, you know, this is Mark chapter 12. But later on, in a couple of chapters, the crowds turn against him. So to model ourselves after Jesus and to not be so attached, another Ignatian phrase, to people's approval, right? I think can be very freeing for us.
So let me turn for a question for Jack. Jack and I are both on a seminar at the Jesuit Institute on the Catholic University. And we have had this year extensive conversations about accompaniment as a way of listening and responding, especially to students in need. Over the past few years, we've noted that quite a number of faculty, staff, and administrators have been a little concerned about what should be their availability to students who want to talk. They know that the student wants to talk, but they know too that they shouldn't be the parent or the therapist or a healthcare worker. But they begin to see through accompaniment that they can be a receptive pilgrim, that they can provide an open door, that they can be ready to be present and listen, that they may not have to solve everything, but receiving and being present and accompanying are really rather key. So Jack, as VP for Mission and Ministry, how do you see accompaniment today at Boston College?
I think that the world today has become a little bit over-professionalized. Everybody has a title, everybody has a degree, everybody has a skill. And what we forget is how to be human. We're meant to be relational. We're meant to fall in love. We're meant to have friends. We're meant to have difficult conversations. We're meant to figure out life together. And so, Jim, the question you asked is a little bit confusing to me. I usually see accompaniment as I'm just Jack. My whole life, my biggest problem is I forget my titles, right, and I forget my roles. And so when I just remember I'm Jack, people can like me, people can hate me, people can be annoyed with me, people can think I'm funny. There's all sorts of ways we interact with each other. That's, you know, how human relationship goes. But if I'm Jack, the most important things I've got to do around accompaniment is I got to show up, I got to be present, I got to really listen, right? I got to be attentive to what's being said to me, and I got to be available. And then the component that I think that that's an art. We all have it, and it's an art that we got to learn. Is you got to be empathetic. You got to hear in a way that the feelings actually touch you. Where I trip over myself and where I get screwed up is sometimes people, whether it's a priest or as a therapist or as a VP, then there's expectations or there's things they want from me that I tend to forget because I just kind of want to be Jack. And then it's in the accompaniment, those people kind of pull out at me and say, hey, dope, we need you to do this for us. And so it's kind of easy to be Jack and walk with people. It's easy I'm a romantic at heart, to fall in love with people, right? I think as the VP, I have to set the conditions that all those different offices that Ramesh talked about, that the very dynamic of the university itself, is what am I doing to help people to remember who they are at their core, human beings, called to be in relationship, and that the greatest power we have as a human being is the skill of empathy, because that's what change is going to come about when we allow people to touch us, to challenge us in a way that makes us feel vulnerable, and that's where we join for the pilgrim, I think.
And you think that that's fairly understood by faculty, staff, and administrators, that type of availability, that they're not swept up by the professionalism that
No, I think the seminar that you invited us to, you could see as we talked about it, people get, when you go and you get your doctorate, you spend a lot of time and you get in the classroom and you're here to teach physics, or you're here to teach moral theology, or you're here to teach English. And, you're saying, I'm not a psychologist or I'm not a whatever, but most of us have fallen in love before, and most of us have grown up with, families with siblings or parents or people that raised us, however we grew up. We've grown up in the context of relationships. And if we can remember that really accompaniment is being who we are and walking with one another, it takes a little bit of the onus off. But do I think most of us recognize that? No. I think we have to get it right. And that if we don't get it right, something horrible is going to happen. And most of the time when you're in relationships, nothing goes right. You don't get it right. But it's in the working with each other and the trying to figure out how to be friends and love each other that it becomes right.
We had an interesting event in another seminar I have, and that's for tenure track faculty. And they had been expressing their concern about how they should respond when a student presents her or himself with some anxiety or concerns or ambivalence, and what role should they have. So we talked about this accompaniment, what Pope Francis's accompaniment. And what I was really surprised by was, and it has a lot to do with what you were just saying, that in a way, by talking about it, we were giving them permission to take on this more familiar, this more easy, this more just being present. You don't have to solve the problem. You don't have to be the professional. What the student is looking for is just the other. And so I've been noticing more and more that people kind of kick in and appreciate some of the permission to take on this more, like what you were saying, this more familiar experiential role of being available. Ramesh.
Jack, as a Catholic priest, a therapist, sometimes people share with you decisions that they're about to make or have made that might contradict with your moral beliefs. How do you support someone like that whilst maintaining your own integrity?
I don't think it's hard. People say it's hard, but I don't think it's hard. And you gave the key there. As a therapist, when I go into the room, and I do only a little bit of therapy now, and I have to work under people's license because I don't have a license anymore because I'm at the school. But when I go into the room to do therapy, I go in as Jack Butler, who is a Jesuit priest. And so why I'm there is I'm concerned about freedom. I'm concerned about love. I'm concerned about all the things of the vulnerable, and I want to be a helper, right? And so my motivation to get in the room comes out of my stance of my accompaniment with this Jesus who says, go and do this, right? But then when I'm in the room, there's where I have actually a role, and now there's a different set of boundaries. And in that boundaries, I have to help people come to their own autonomy. And so if it's really about somebody else's autonomy, it's about achieving freedom. And whether you're talking about spirituality or whether you're talking about psychology, the goal is the maximization of one's autonomy to freedom. And so I don't get to pick what people hold dear, believe, have faith. And most likely now in my life, maybe when I was in psych hospitals and doing different work, you didn't know who I was. You didn't know I was Jack Butler, who was a Jesuit priest. But now most of the time when people come to me, they know I'm Jack Butler, the Jesuit priest. And Cardinal Martini, the Jesuit, said it best. If you're coming to me, you know all the baggage that I have as a Catholic priest. You know all the things that the church is saying to me that's important. And so if you've come to me, you kind of know that about me. And my job is to give you a place that's safe, that you know that you're going to be loved and accepted, for you to start to deal with your own internal movements so that you can own it. And the only time in a therapy where I have to really say, inject an ethic, is if I think somebody's going to hurt themselves, right? If they've hurt somebody else, if they've hurt a child, then I have to say, wait a second, I got to get involved with that. But everything else, now if they come to me pastorally, they can say to me, hey, Jack, what do you think about this? And I can say, well, here's what the church says about it. And here's how I've come to understand it. But then I have to say, well, what do you think about it? Because even Jesus, when he was talking about his own identity, right? He had that great line. He was, what do people say about me? Oh, you're Elijah, you're this, you're that. Oh, oh, that's great. Then he goes, but what do you say? Because even Jesus knew that it's the autonomy of the individual that actualizes the relationship.
Great.
So this is a question for both of you. As Jesuits, I think the first lessons of accompaniment are learned by people who accompany us, generally in what we call formation. I think most of our lay friends have no idea what that means when we talk about our formation. They know a part of it. They may know us when we were teaching in Regency or something, but they don't have a full sense of it. But in any event, most of us really are affected, I think, through accompaniment during the years that we're preparing for ministry. Who in the Society of Jesus has accompanied you, and how and what do you learn and receive in that journey?
Well, I'll start if that's okay, Jack.
I prefer it. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, Jim, you're one of the people that have accompanied me as a teacher and a mentor, and I've learned so much from you. So teachers and mentors like you, friends like Jack and Ramesh. But when you ask that question, the first group of people that comes to mind are spiritual directors. And for those who are not familiar with that, it's a person who speaks to you about your experiences of God in your daily life and in your prayer. And I've been really blessed to have some amazing people. And at the beginning of my Jesuit life as a novice, so formation is basically our training, as Jim was alluding to. And at the beginning of my Jesuit life, and all the way throughout, I've had some amazing people who have accompanied me in my darkest moments, and really accompanying someone that didn't know what he was doing in the spiritual life, didn't know anything about prayer. I think of someone, people may not know this name, David Donovan, who was my first spiritual director and the assistant novice director. And I won't go into a whole story of, you know, our relationship, but, you know, like good spiritual directors, he really met you where you were. And I've had people that have, helped me through family crises, through emotional crises, through vocational crises. And it is about accompaniment. And as Jack was saying, you know, to sort of meet the person without judgment. So, for example, I do a lot of spiritual direction. And when a Jesuit comes to me, for example, and says, you know, I'm thinking of leaving the Jesuits, you know, I have an opinion, right? I don't want this guy to leave, right? But St. Ignatius says you have to be like the pointer on a balance, you know, like those old balances on a supermarkets, right? Indifferent and sort of helping the person come to a decision on his or her own, you know, with God's light. So as much as possible, you try to stay out of it. And I found that, you know, some of the best spiritual directors are able to do that. By the same token, ironically, and I'd be curious to hear what Jack says about this, I think in psychology, it's different. They often share their own experiences, which I know is a little more verboten in therapy, but that's sometimes really helpful. And so accompanying sometimes means sharing your story. I'll tell you something funny and then I'll shut up. I often say to my directees, you know, now I'm not supposed to do this, but, you know, I'm going to share something of my own experience with that, whatever it is. And, you know, Jesuits and lay people and clergy. And to a person, they'll always say, oh, I really like it when you do that. Which is kind of against the tenets of spiritual direction. But I think part of accompaniment is sharing your own story too, and being vulnerable with them as well.
I think, Jim, you kind of covered it. I would say that I've had a lot of people who've been my mentor and who've accompanied me. And I've had, as you said about Jim, I've had him stop me through different phases of my formation, say, how you doing? You know, basically kind of take on the role of a bigger brother. I guess what I would want to do to fill out maybe what your experience and what you just shared, Jim, was sometimes we're too dumb to know that people are accompanying us. And when I say that, I'm really talking about me, right? That I grew up as an only child. At birth, my twin died, and I grew up as an only child. And I grew up in a convoluted kind of a family, that there was always people in my family, and there were always people around the table, and my mom and dad took people in that I didn't have any idea who they were, and I'd come down at breakfast, and I'd have this rotating family. But at the core of it, existentially, I was an only child. And so I don't think, and this is speaking to, you want about vulnerability, this is speaking about my stupidity. I missed how many people accompanied me throughout my life. And it wasn't until my mom's death that I looked behind me when I was celebrating it, and everybody in the community at St. Mary's was there. And these are people that some I knew didn't like me, some all sorts of things, right? And I looked around, and that's when I became emotional, because I realized, you dumbass, look at these people. Look at what God's given you. You're not alone. And so the second component of accompanying isn't so much how we accompany. Do we open our eyes and understand that we are being accompanied all the time?
Yeah.
Thank you. So my ministry involves meeting many young, vibrant people every day. Given the circumstances that we find ourselves in today around the world, I'm actually in the restaurant, in the volunteer-based restaurant. It's been really quiet. It's like walking along a school corridor during the school break. It's eerie to a certain extent. And I found myself a few days ago just coming in and sitting down right here, feeling a little bit dejected, and began praying. And the image that came to mind was of Saint Ignatius at La Scorta, seeing Jesus and the Father walking, Jesus carrying his cross, and the Father telling Jesus to welcome me and to assist him in carrying that cross. What struck me was Jesus welcoming me first, but me accompanying Jesus too on this pilgrimage. For you, John, Jack, and Jim, what image, religious experience do you hold close to you? Perhaps something biblical, perhaps the life of Ignatius, or I don't know.
Go ahead, Jim. You're my older brother in religion.
But not by much. Can you tell me, Ramesh, I wasn't sure I understood the question at the end. What religious experience did I have that relates to the virus right now?
No, what religious experience do you hold personally that you often go back to remind you of God accompanying you, Jesus being close to you?
Oh, that's an easy one. So as you said at the beginning, by accompanying LGBT people, I've had some opposition from a small but very vocal group of people. And about 5 years ago, I was on a retreat, and I was praying about the story of the rejection at Nazareth. So that's the part of the story in the Gospels where Jesus stands up in the synagogue in his hometown, and he preaches essentially that he is the Messiah, more or less. And people reject him and drive him to the brow of a hill, and they want to kill him, basically. And I remember thinking that so many and I'm sure people who are listening, the main way that people have of looking at that, and you probably heard homilies like this, is, oh, how often do we miss God in front of us because God seems so familiar, right? And so we miss God and we don't recognize God, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time, I was drawn to looking at from Jesus's point of view. And I realized I was doing this book on Jesus, that Nazareth was a very small town, 200 to 400 people. So he must have known the people in the synagogue, right? I mean, however many people there were that day, if it was only the men, let's say 50, 60, 70 people. And I asked Jesus in prayer, well, how were you able to do this? How could you stand up and say these things knowing that, you know these people, you know what they're going to do? And the words I heard in prayer that came to me were Jesus saying, must everybody like you? And I said to myself and said to Jesus, yes, at that time. But that's really been a touchstone for me with this opposition. And again, that's that freedom. The freedom, from the need to be loved, liked, or approved of. And truly, I go back to that almost every day. Now, I don't have to, it's not as traumatic as it was about a year ago, but that's really been a touchstone for me. And I just find that passage just so interesting and rich. And, there's no way the gospel writers would have put that in because that's an embarrassing passage. So we can be fairly sure that happened. So So, we're supposed to take Christ as our model. And in that scripture passage, I found a lot of hope and comfort.
Thanks, Jim. Jack?
I don't know if this is the central one, but when Jim was talking and he was sharing his story, I remember when I was in first studies in Chiswick Hall, we had this, it was a tough year. And so we were doing this processing about, we were sitting in a circle and everybody was telling everybody what they thought of each other. And so I left from that experience and I was feeling a little bruised and hurt. And so I went to my room, and as Jim was talking about it, we Jesuits do imaginative prayer, Ignatian contemplation. And so I went to Luke, and I knew exactly what I wanted, right? It was the paralytic, and it was the scene where they go up and they take the roof apart. And I had 4 people in my life that I loved that I thought should accompany me, carrying me, and I had them doing it, and all this was going on. And then all of a sudden, like, the prayer stopped. And Jesus said, "What are you doing? Why are you on the stretcher? You're not sick." I'm like, "Well, I'm feeling sick." He goes, "Get up." He goes, "I want you to carry a few people before you get in the stretcher." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's not a bad idea." And this whole idea of, I really do have come to see, and what Jim's been doing with the seminar, and a lot of what Jim's doing at the center. I have this friend Jesus, and I'm pretty darn sure he loves me and takes me. And I'm not a prize all the time, but he takes me and he loves me. And what he wants me to do is kind of do that for other people. And I don't need to be carried yet because he's right next to me. And maybe I need to start branching out and walking with a few other people. That was the one that came to me in philosophy.
So I'd like to turn right now, because we have a number of minutes before turning to the audience questions. But as I began this program talking about racism, a specific reflection. The murder of George Floyd has been so disturbing in so many ways that the viciousness of racism, anti-Blackness, white supremacy are brutally visible. Can you each say what you think long-term accompaniment means when white supremacy and anti-Blackness seem on occasion to be actually on the rise here in the United States? So long-term accompaniment, what does that mean in the concrete moment where there's such bigotry and harmful, really dreadfully, deadfully harmful actions being taken?
I'll start. I couldn't go down. There was a prayer service today outside St. Ignatius.
Yeah,
right?
It was great.
And I couldn't go down because I was meeting with folks up here. And an accompaniment, real accompaniment, I was meeting with a friend of mine who's Black, who asked to see me. And because you're Jack Butler and you have all those degrees and you have this title and you have this thing, sometimes it's like, I'm supposed to do something, right? Well, accompaniment is a double-way street. I had to sit there and listen and realize I'm part of the problem. Whether it's active or not, I'm part of the problem. And I needed to realize my part of accompaniment here is I'm a little bit powerless. I got to be part of the solution, but I'm a little bit powerless. And I had to allow my friend to not only accompany me and start to teach me and have me understand experiences and feelings in a way that were disturbing to me, that were challenging to me, so that we could really carry on an accompaniment where I'm going to follow now a little bit. And so therefore, the long-term thing is, no matter the feeling, no matter the difficulty, am I committed to being the follower in this accompaniment? And to allow not just this one friend, but a lot of my friends to teach me about what's needed, some responses, and not give up or grow tired or grow frustrated or grow angry or become fearful, but to learn. Because if you saw any of those videos, it was gut-wrenching. And if you're a Christian and you believe in the stuff that we believe in, and when I say we, I'm talking about the four of us that I'm seeing here, I'm complicit in it. And I got to own that. And accompaniment is a part of that journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really profound way of saying it, Jack, that, that we have to be the followers. And I agree. Look, I'm white, first of all, with all that goes with that, and white privilege. I'm a Catholic, part of a church that hasn't really, up until recently, stood up against racism. And I'm a Jesuit, member of a religious order that, in certain parts of the country owns slaves, bought and sold slaves. And so I have to accept that to begin with. I find, though, that what I basically do is I look to African Americans for leadership and for guidance in this. It reminds me of something that a transgender person told me, which is that, all you need to do is listen to the community because they know what they need, right? So it's not like, in terms of the transgender community, the church deciding what they need. It's listening to them. And so what do they need? So listening to African Americans, especially in the Catholic Church, which is my primary community, and what they need. This is a long way of saying that I have found one of Jim's colleagues extremely helpful, Father Brian Massengale, who is a theology professor at Fordham University, who has been writing about this for years and years. And I want to recommend two things that people can, one, a talk he gave called The Magis and Justice at the Ignatian Family Teach-In, that truly, I have to say, it was one of the best presentations on any topic I've ever heard in my entire life. It's on YouTube. It's very easy to find. And then the second thing is his article recently in the National Catholic Reporter, which was just superb. And one of the things that really, to your point about following, Jack, one of the things that really was revelatory to me and helpful was his comment that that what defines the limits of the conversation is white comfort, right? And so when white people get uncomfortable about whatever it is, reparations or the protests, the way the protests are happening, the rioting, whenever white people get uncomfortable about that, it means that the conversation stops. And I found that really struck me, in that it was an invitation to put up with some discomfort. And so I've been watching things online and talking to people that, are really outside my comfort zone, that I normally wouldn't watch and normally wouldn't read, to challenge me. So I think it's about being uncomfortable. And, Jim, it's funny to turn your saying on its head a little bit. Maybe that's our willingness to put up with some chaos within ourselves, right? So it's not simply entering into the chaos of the other person, but actually say, my life for a time is, and maybe it is, my life for a time is going to be chaotic interiorly, and it's funny, I'm just thinking out loud, Jim, because I always thought that when I thought about your that phrase, which has always stuck with me, as you know, it was sort of me from a place of calm entering into this chaotic place, almost like me going into a hospital that's chaotic, and then I sort of remove myself. But I think it's allowing that chaos to enter yourself as well, and your willingness to let your own life be chaotic. So yeah, just a few thoughts.
If I could just follow up with dovetail, it strikes me though too that the African American community is also though expecting us to do something. So it's true, I think that that the agenda is better in their hands than in ours. I mean, that's what this is about, in part, actually making sure that they have a say in the agenda in a way that they haven't before. And so I think one of the things that I'm hearing both of you say is that it's actually handing it over so that they have the space and the voice and the authority and the power to be able to express what we have so often figured out ways of muting, overlooking, ignoring, and the rest. I am concerned about what's the next step after following. When do whites begin to accompany that they're walking shoulder to shoulder with African Americans? Do you see? I'm concerned about an accompaniment that's not going to go back to somebody else's following. I'm concerned about an accompaniment that really has a way of overcoming, if you will, or recognizing, or living with, or becoming accustomed to that discomfort. Because that's a good
question. I would, again, I don't want to keep relating it to the LGBT experience because it's very different, but I think part of it is being willing to put up with rejection on behalf of them and because of that. And so to put your neck out and to risk people rejecting you or misunderstanding you or attacking you in order that you might stand with them. So I always think of, I don't know how much, I don't know if I could go into more specifics, but I always think, of the parable of the Good Samaritan. So the Good Samaritan, which can be read in multiple ways. The man who goes to the beaten man by the side of the road is actually risking something. I mean, the road to Jericho, there's still bandits there. And so, you have to put yourself, I think, on the line for people. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, to stretch myself a bit. But, the other answer to the question is like concrete steps. I'm not sure I know the answer for that, which is not something you hear from a Jesuit every day.
Jack?
No, well, Jim, I think the question's right on target. When I said you gotta take a step back and you gotta follow a little bit, that's the first step. But eventually, when you're really at the point where you can hold your own chaos, when you can feel through the empathy what the other's feeling, eventually you shoulder up, right? And then it becomes that yoking where it's not one person or the other doing it, but it's together. And it's about how do you get access to education? How do you get equity in communities? How do you listen to looking at problems from all its vectors and points instead of just one? But I don't want to, you're absolutely right. You have to take that next step, and you have to then partner up to do it. But if you don't get the first one down, you'll never get the second one to happen.
Great. We have to shift to the audience because the audience, we have a number of audience questions here. Ramesh, do you want to take the first from Quasi?
Yeah, our first question is from Quasi Sarkodie Mensah from BC Libraries. And Quasi asks, at Boston College, when adults talk about accompaniment, it looks like it's a top-down process, faculty, staff, administrators accompanying students. How do students accompany us, staff members?
Yeah, well, just a shout out to Quasi. I think he's great. I love him. But the other aspect of that is I don't see it that way. I think if you work in education, actually it's many times the students are accompanying us. As I get a little bit more gray hair, as I get a little bit older, they keep me up to date. And they allow me to understand issues in a way that I don't think a 57-year-old guy would have begun to understand. And they kind of bring me into a worldview that I haven't had. Now, hopefully the accompaniment goes that also then starts to happen, that I bring them into a world that maybe they haven't seen, and I bring them into some experiences they haven't seen. But a lot of these students have taught me about who Jack Butler is, or have taught me to relook at my dreams or my desires because of their passion, their zeal, and I mean this as a gift now. I was going to use the term. I don't know what the term. Their naivete, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean in the purity, where they see possibilities. When you get to be my age, and I'm not old. I'm not conceding I'm old, but when you get to my age, you can become jaded. And what I get from students sometimes is, come on, Jack, reinvest, re-engage. And so I think it's vital that they accompany us and they stretch us.
So I'm going to jump to another question by Jess Morrison, who's an IREPM graduate of 2005 and who works at Ursuline Academy in Dedham now. And she writes that we are all now navigating how to do virtual campus ministry. For all panelists, what is one recommendation you would give to high school campus ministers as we return in the fall and possibly continue or not remote schooling?
Boy, that's a hard one. I don't work with high school kids very much, but I have, well, I'll just say this. I would say one recommendation is do not underestimate the stress that people are under, the sadness that people feel, and the feeling of isolation. I have been talking to a lot of young people, and I think it's much more pronounced than we think. And so I think that anything you can do to be gentle with these kids, I'm trying to like cloak this story, but I know a young person who was in college until recently, and they were saying that you know, up until graduation, they felt that the teachers were giving them all this work, more work than normal, because the teachers thought, well, gee, you don't have any extracurricular activities, so I'm just going to pile work on. And this poor student was just deluged with stuff. And because I don't think the teachers particularly gave a thought to how stressful things are. So I would say don't underestimate their emotional sadness around what's happened in the last couple of months.
Jack or Ramesh?
I was hoping Ramesh was going to handle this one. You're a little bit closer to this.
I'll echo Jim's answer, really. I think it's important to, you know, as described earlier about accompaniment, just being present and supporting and asking. And, you know, I think we should not be afraid to ask, how can I help you? And that's something just in this ministry here, I often ask them, how can I help you? And, you know, the first step of discerning is always gathering the information. So I think that's important, to check in and ask.
One quick thing to the question. Don't worry about getting it right. If you wait to get it right, the time will come and pass and go. It's more important to engage. And engage poorly is better than no engagement. And if you do it, you'll start to figure out how to do it.
If I could jump in, I would say that there's a certain discipline. You know, here we are on Zoom. Zoom requires a lot more discipline than it's much more demanding, much more focused. There's a lot more of this happening. And I found that sharing with my students some of my struggles. Now, of course, they didn't want me to screw up the class. They actually were hoping I would do better. But by sharing with them my ambiguity, I was giving them permission to unwind as well. I think that what Jim was saying earlier, I think that's really key, to appreciate how difficult these times are, and on many, many levels. And especially for younger people who are learning how to articulate what those feelings and desires are. And I don't think that they can get there unless, you know, their teachers, their ministers, give them the space to know that we are struggling too. So I think that's part of that accompaniment that goes with it. Ramesh, our team is telling us for you to ask the 7th question, the last question there by Tabby.
Okay. The question is from Tabby Arif, STM student class of 2019. And Tabby asks, in accompaniment, I would like to believe that empathy and trust are crucial elements. What would these terms mean for the person in pain who doesn't believe that the other person feels their pain and understands their struggle?
You both have plenty of experience in that.
This is a good question, Tabby.
Yeah.
I know exactly where you live. Ramesh, can you just give the end part of that question? Because I got the empathy, and if it's not working and they don't believe it's felt, but there was something else I missed. Could you just rephrase it?
If you don't mind me reading it again, what would these terms mean for the person in pain who doesn't believe that the other person feels their pain and understands their struggle?
Well, let me be real practical here, and maybe this is the therapist in me, maybe this is the spiritual director. They might be right, right?
Yeah.
You know that they might be right, and so you might need to find somebody else. That I would say to somebody like that, trust your feelings.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not a judgment about the person. I've been able in my life to be really good at accompanying and helping some people, but I would be lying through my teeth if I didn't tell you and everybody that's listening, I've also screwed up and not helped people. And what I would want people to hear is, I want people to trust their own authority and their own perception. And so if they're feeling like maybe this person isn't understanding me or there isn't sufficient empathy, well, then maybe that's true. And maybe you need to find somebody else. And so that's just a practical answer.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's absolutely right. If you're a person in pain, you need help, right? Or you need someone to listen to you. You need a good therapist. You need a good spiritual director. You need a good counselor. You need a good friend, right? I think it's good to give the person the benefit of the doubt, because there's different ways of accompanying, right? And you might go to someone, I've been to spiritual directors or therapists who are very quiet at the beginning. You think, oh my gosh, this person, they're not even paying attention. And then after half an hour, they come out with something very helpful. So you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But, as we say in spiritual direction all the time, if this isn't working for you, you should feel free to find someone that you feel comfortable with. So I think that the person in pain really needs to be helped first and not to be embarrassed to say, I think I'll try somebody else. So I think Jack's right. I agree.
So we're moving to closure, and Ramesh is going to have the last word. But I just want to say something before, in gratitude for both of you being here. But each of you, when we were designing this program, so we have 26 events, 26 segments on this, and we've been working it through the entire time. And one of the first things we wanted to do was to get the two of you on the show together. And I don't think most people think Martin Butler, but I thought here at BC, Martin Butler would work really well. And from all the different comments I'm getting, it seems like it's working very well. I think that it's important for the audience to know how much we think of one another. My esteem for Jack, Jack knows when I go to his office that he's supposed to close the door and let me sit and talk. And he also knows that he can rely on me. But we really care for one another. And Jim, I admire you so much. I just think your courage, your intelligence, your wit, your use of irony. I think that a lot of Catholics feel better being Catholic because you're such a public voice. So just speaking as a Jesuit, I had to say, I've been really looking forward to this, and having Ramesh on this and recruiting him into this has been a lot of fun too. So now Ramesh, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
So it's time for us to conclude. So thank you once again to Father Jim Martin and Father Jack Butler for joining us today. I also take this opportunity to thank all our guests and Father Jim Keenan for co-hosting the show with me. This coming Tuesday, at BC at 6 show, we'll discuss another interesting topic, scholars at risk. We will have scholar Barakatullah Ashurov, who just completed an assistant professorship at Boston College. He is originally from Tajikistan, where he experienced censorship and the threat of imprisonment. We will also have Kathleen Bailey, professor of the practice, political science, and co-director of Gabelli Presidential Scholars Program. The show will be hosted by Mary Crane, professor and director of Institute for the Liberal Arts, and Billy Su, vice provost for faculties and associate professor, accounting. Just a reminder, you need to register for each segment you want to attend. As you know, registration is very brief, but each segment has a different webinar link. So please check out our webpage, bc.edu/show@6, and see the next segments. Finally, be well and stay safe. Good night from Boston College.